Hey, it's Brent. The first segment of this podcast deals with gender-based violence and rape culture, subjects that may be triggering for some people. If you're experiencing gender-based violence and need assistance, please call 0800-A-WAY-OUT or send a text or WhatsApp message to 672-9628. Coming up, the issue of rape culture goes way deeper than a disgusting video. And Hurricane Nana turns into Hurricane Nada.
You're listening to Brent's Two Cents, the semi-serious thoughts of a guy in Belize. And now here's the host of this podcast from somewhere in Belize City, Brent Toombs.
Hey, welcome to the podcast for the week of September 7th. Well, last week was a hell of a month, wasn't it? Just to recap, we had a hurricane. The COVID-19 numbers continued to climb rapidly. As of Sunday night, when I recorded this episode, we have 1,261 confirmed cases, with 945 of those cases being currently active. We also had more deaths. 15 Belizeans have now been lost to COVID-19. The lockdown in San Pedro was finally lifted, and a few days later, so was the nationwide curfew. And before the week was even over, the Office of the Director of Health Services was once again pleading with Belizeans to obey the rules, to take this epidemic seriously, and to stop partying. But probably the worst thing from last week was a widely circulated video that depicted a woman being physically and sexually abused. She was being forced to perform oral sex on a man. Police have since arrested notorious gang figure Kenneth Big Tom Flowers and an associate of his who was present at the time of the assault. Police allege that Big Tom is the director of the video, and it's his voice that could be heard off camera, humiliating and degrading the woman while forcing her into a coerced sex act. Commissioner of Police Chester Williams says he has identified at least 3 criminal charges that could be laid. However, the female victim is not cooperating with police at this time, most likely due to fear for her own safety, considering Big Tom's gang affiliation. So for now, it appears the most police can do is take advantage of the Southside state of emergency, which had been extended for an additional 60 days, and place Big Tom and his associate on remand at Belize Central Prison. Now, I haven't seen this particular video. Fortunately, no one in my circle of acquaintances felt the need or zeal to share such a despicable video with me. But plenty of people in Belize did see it. And I'm not going to spend any more time dissecting this particular video. Because while it may be one of the most reprehensible recent examples of cyberbullying, it's only a symptom of a much bigger social problem in Belize: rape culture. The Big Tom video may have crossed the threshold that was so disturbing that no one would dare defend it or make any excuses for why the victim could be even partially to blame. But dial back the evilness just a bit, and suddenly plenty of people would have plenty to say in defense of abusers and bullies. Just a few days after the Big Tom video, another cyberbullying video went viral in Belize. This time, it was an alleged senior police officer following and verbally harassing a woman he purportedly has some sort of relationship with. In the video, he repeatedly calls her a prostitute and accuses her of sexual promiscuity and infidelity. When asked about this particular video, Commissioner Williams told 7 News that, quote, "humiliating people is not a crime." Well, if it was a crime, hundreds of Facebook users in Belize could be facing arrest for all the disgraceful comments posted every time a female goes missing or is sexually assaulted. You've likely read the comments about how teenage girls these days run too hot, or how they must have run away from home to go have sex with their boyfriend or someone else's husband. And the comments only get more disgusting when these missing children are found or returned home. People actually call for them to be beaten, and worse. I recall one incident where people were suggesting that a 14-year-old girl needed to have habanero pepper rubbed on her genitals as punishment for being found in the company of a 27-year-old man. Another person suggested she have her head shaved and be paraded through the streets of her town. Many of these types of comments are made by women, by mothers, and few people actually condemn men for raping children. That's what rape culture looks like. And this type of cyberbullying has a devastating effect on society. These minors, whose identities are often well known if they were originally in the news as a missing person, are almost certainly reading those same horrible comments on social media. Imagine the harm that is being inflicted on teenage girls to see their bodies, their appearances, and their sexuality discussed and demonized on social media. How are these girls ever going to feel safe in our society when mobs of people are calling for them to be beaten or tortured or jailed or publicly shamed for being raped? For certain other girls who are also being sexually abused in private by adult men are reading those comments and are hearing the message loud and clear that it's always their fault, that victims get what they deserve, and that rapists are never fully responsible for their crimes. Is it any wonder that someone would be reluctant to report sexual assault or cooperate with police? And what about all the other young girls in Belize who will be sexually harassed or sexually assaulted at some point in their life, who are right now being groomed by society via social media and street corner gossip to accept that they are to blame for whatever these predators do to them in the future? When a woman does find the courage to report a rape or sexual assault, too often it's her integrity and honesty that is put on trial in the court of public opinion. People gossip and speculate about her motives for coming forward, suggesting that she may be lying or seeking revenge or payment. Yeah, basically calling her a prostitute, just like that jilted lover of a cop I mentioned earlier. Oh, and let some time go by between when the sexual assault occurs and the complaint is made, and the howls and shrieks that these women must be lying increases exponentially. How could she wait months or years to press charges, they ask, without realizing that they just answered their own stupid question? All this shaming, blaming, and doubting makes it less likely that a woman will ever speak up about sexual abuse or rape or any form of gender-based violence. The perpetrators know that, and they are empowered by it. That's rape culture. And then there are the videos. Revenge porn and the unauthorized distribution of sexually explicit videos and photographs is not a uniquely Belizean phenomenon. Countries such as Canada have only recently dealt with this issue by enacting laws that make the sharing and possession of leaked nudes and sex videos a crime. Advocates such as the Special Envoy for Women and Children, the Ministry of Human Development, the Ministry of the Attorney General, and others are working on getting our own cyberbullying law passed. And I have it on good authority that a draft of the cyberbullying bill will be presented to Cabinet this week, with commitment from government to get that bill passed into law before the general election is called and Parliament is dissolved. And once that law gets on the books, that means anyone who shares a sex video or nudes without consent will be guilty of a crime. It won't matter if you're only sharing those images to create awareness or to encourage the police to take action. No matter how many OMGs and crying face emojis you attach, sharing those types of images will be a crime. And so it should be. But really, we shouldn't need a law to compel us to do the decent thing. Just don't share. If someone sends you a sex video or a nude photo, delete it and reply to the person who sent it to you, telling them why they need to do the same. Anyone who shares the Big Tom video or any of the countless other unauthorized sex tapes and nude photos that have been circulating in Belize for years is guilty of re-victimizing the people in those images. And finally, there are much more subtle aspects of rape culture in Belize, and that is the commoditization and objectification of women in our society. Now, I know I'm treading on hallowed ground when I say this, but it's time to do away with beauty pageants. No matter how much you want to argue that these pageants celebrate grace and poise and intellect, at the end of the day, you will never have a Belizean beauty queen who does not fit the mold of conventional beauty. And maybe I wouldn't care so much about putting 5 or 6 young women on stage to be judged based on how they look if the rest of society didn't put so much value on that. Being Queen of the Bay or Miss Whatever is a resume item in Belize. Doors will open for you if you wear a sash and win a crown. And the message that sends to Belizean women is, be pretty, because everyone prefers a pretty girl. But never mind how we revere beauty queens. Let's just look at how we celebrate the accomplishments of everyday women in Belize. A woman posts about completing her education or advancing her career, and people will compliment her with comments like, wow, beauty and brains, or congrats, sexy mama. Nobody talks to men like that, at least not in that context. When is the last time you saw a young man in Belize boast that he just got called to the bar, and someone replies with, well, you'll make a sexy lawyer? Just this weekend, the Belize People's Front introduced their candidate for Cayo Central, and many of the comments I read on Facebook were only concerned about how physically attractive this woman is, not her policy platform or qualifications, just that she's good looking. And that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to lack of female participation in electoral politics. But let me save that for a future episode. Right now, we all need to take a hard look at what role we play in perpetuating misogyny and rape culture in Belize. From microaggressions such as highlighting physical beauty of women unnecessarily, or making excuses for the behavior of men, or making insensitive comments on social media, or sharing unauthorized images that only cause further harm to victims who have already suffered tremendously. Legislation will help, but real change will only take place when we stop seeing women as objects to be consumed, shared, and enjoyed. Now, if you or someone you know is experiencing gender-based violence and needs assistance, please call the Family Violence Unit 24-hour hotline at 0800 A Way Out. That's 0800 292 9688. Or send a text or WhatsApp message to 672 9628. I'll post those numbers in the description for this episode.
We want to hear from you. You can find Brent's 2 Cents on Twitter and Facebook at 2 Cents Belize, or email us at podcast@oxaproductions.com. That's OXAProductions.com.
Hey, if I had advertisers, this is where I would take a moment to read some advertising copy, or what they call in the podcast biz, a mid-roll read. But I don't want to do ads. When I decided to produce my own podcast, the last thing I wanted to do was spend time telling you about my pillow or mail order underwear. But that doesn't mean I couldn't use a few bucks to help keep this podcast going. You see, even though I do this podcast for free, and you get to listen to it for free, there are still costs associated with podcasting, such as music licensing, internet hosting, and promotion. And those costs come straight out of my own pocket. And, well, they're starting to add up. But there's an easy way you can show support for this show, and that's simply by buying me a cup of coffee for just $3 or 6 Belize. There's a link for Buy Me a Coffee in the description of this show, and I'll occasionally post that link on Brent's 2 Cents Facebook page. So if you want to help out, just click that link and buy me a coffee. Thanks. Okay, it's time for some good news. And the good news last week was Hurricane Nana, or as some people are now calling it, Hurricane Nada. What looked like a potentially destructive storm for Belize ultimately did very little damage and didn't produce any significant flooding. That's not to say there wasn't some damage in areas such as Hopkins and Silk Grass, but I think in the hours before Nana made landfall, we were all bracing for much, much worse. Now, I think one thing that needs to be put in context is that while the amount of damage caused by Nana may have been minor compared to storms in previous years, the capacity of many people and businesses to recover has been greatly reduced due to the current economic crisis. So losing a few sheets of zinc in 2020 may be just as devastating for some people as losing their entire roof in 2016. So please keep that in mind if you hear people reaching out for help after what appeared to be a minor storm. Now we'll have to wait a few weeks to see if people going to hurricane shelters will result in a spike in COVID-19 infections. But the good news is that people who did go into shelters ultimately only needed to spend one night in those facilities. And it appears NEMO had protocols in place to segregate people who may be positive or who have been in close contact with someone who has the virus. For me, the biggest concern before and after the hurricane is the section of the George Price Highway that washed out at mile 37 2.5 months ago and has yet to be repaired. On the day of the hurricane, Ministry of Works was frantically trying to reinforce the patch job they did back in June, which caused a massive backup for people trying to evacuate inland. If Nana had brought severe flooding, that section of the highway most likely would have washed away, and Western Belize would have been cut off from the rest of the country. Don't forget, it took 4 years to replace the Kendall Bridge, and we were lucky that during that time, southern Belize was not hit with a major hurricane. Let's hope the Ministry of Works is not going to roll the dice at mile 37, because we are just starting the historically active part of our hurricane season. Now, before I go, I want to give a shout out to my fellow Belizean podcasters, especially Change the Narrative and the Natasha Stewart podcast. Both released new episodes last week, so be sure to give those a listen. Also, I want to tell you about another podcast you might want to check out, even though it's not produced by Belizeans. It's called Down the Path. It's a true crime podcast, and their second season is all about the unsolved murders of Belizean fly fishing guide Mario Graniel and his guest American Gary Swank. This 5-episode series covers the murders, the investigation, and provides an update to where things are at 1 year after the crime took place. True crime is a very popular genre for podcasts, so take a listen to Down the Path Season 2 and let me know what you think of that show. And that's going to do it for episode 10 of Brent's 2 Cents. Remember, you can find this show everywhere you get your podcasts, including Apple and Spotify, and all the podcast apps for Android and iPhone. Every episode is also uploaded to YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And if you like the show, please give it a 5-star rating and a review, because those things really help an independent podcast like this to get noticed. You can contact me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at 2 Cents Belize, and I really encourage you to leave me a WhatsApp voice message to use on next week's podcast. You can find the WhatsApp number on the Brent's 2 Cents Facebook page. Remember, you can be part of the podcast movement in Belize by sharing this show with at least one person who otherwise may not know about it. Word of mouth is the best form of advertising, so please help to grow the audience for Brent's 2 Cents and all your favorite Belizean podcasts. Another way you can show support is by buying me a cup of coffee for just $3 or 6 Belize. This podcast is a labor of love, but there are expenses that do add up. So if you want to help keep this podcast going, just click on the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description for the show or on the Brent's 2 Cents Facebook page. Hey, huge thanks to those of you who messaged me last week to say you tried to buy me a coffee, but the link wasn't working. Turns out that PayPal doesn't play so well with Belize, but that's been all sorted out, and now the Buy Me a Coffee link will work for anyone in Belize or elsewhere. Okay, I'll have another episode for you on Monday, September the 14th. Until then, happy Battle of St. George's Key Day. But please celebrate the 10th responsibly. That means no social gatherings, not even a Lee barbecue with your relatives and best friends, unless you all happen to live in the same house. We've got to get this COVID-19 situation under control, and that's only going to happen if we all follow the laws that are in place to keep us safe. Until next week, please stay home as much as possible. Wash your hands, wear your mask, and most importantly, be nice to each other.
Brent's 2 Cents is a presentation of OSHA Productions, Belize's affordable professional video production company.